Hi guys, welcome back aboard the 44-foot hurricane damaged Antares catamaran. For the last 4 months we have been trying really hard to purchase this pile of fiberglass, and we finally have good news. Of course, good news is relative because in its current state we've got thousands of hours of work ahead of us to get this boat back on the water. We've got some structural issues, we've got tons of cosmetic issues. Right now she's leaking like a sieve, and also the engines are out of the boat. Not to mention the fact that the mast that comes with the boat, the one you see here, is basically junk. But like I said, there's good news because we are now officially the owners of all of this. We are in no way money rich, but at least now we're rich in junk. So much junk. My goal for this week's video is to give you guys a glimpse into how the heck we're gonna get started on a project like this. It kind of reminds me of that old joke with how do you eat a whole elephant, one bite at a time. So I'll give you guys a glimpse into our foreseeable future, and last but not least, I hope to be able to finish the Tramp ramp I started a few weeks ago. We are still very much in the early getting started stages of this project. It'll be a while until I can get the steam up and really get rolling and make some progress. But step number 1 is going to be to get this place all nice and tidy. Step number 2 is going to be to build steps instead of this ladder here, because I'll be going up and down here thousands of times, and I would prefer not to almost die every other time. Step number 3 is going to be to get some kind of, well, get this tidied up, but also get some kind of air conditioning installed here inside of the boat, because while it is doable to work under the boat right now, with the sun beating down on the boat, this place turns into a sauna. Before we start talking about what we need to do to get this boat back on the water, I want to give you guys a super quick Cliff Notes version of what has happened to this boat up until now and why it's in the state that it's in. This is Brian. He is the now previous owner of the catamaran. The catamaran used to be called Carefree and was partially sunk by Hurricane Dorian in 2019. During the hurricane, unfortunately, another catamaran landed on top of Carefree and crushed her hardtop, cabin top and starboard hull. The entire starboard hull was underwater after the hull was pierced by a piling, leaving what can best be described as a giant wet-soaking mess of nastiness. This is the state Brian purchased the boat in. After copious amounts of cleaning, the inside started looking nicer, but of course there was still the small matter of all the damage. Brian had the boat towed from the Bahamas to Florida. Once in Florida, she was lifted out and trucked all the way to the salvage yard where she sits today. Brian set to work repairing the damage. The cross sections of the hull had to be forced back into place using bottle jacks and lumber. At this point, I don't think Brian had ever done any kind of glass work, so much like when I started aboard Obelix, it was a bit of a learning experience for him. First, he tackled the crushed cabin top, rebuilding the damaged areas to the original laminating scheme from PDQ, that's the yard in Canada that built this boat. As much work as there still is aboard the catamaran today, it was much worse when Brian first started. In a fun little glimpse back in time, this is what the area underneath the boat looked like back then. When the cabin top was crushed, the secondary bulkhead between the saloon and the cockpit also sustained a lot of damage. When the bulkhead was crushed, so was the helm station. There's nothing super difficult about repairing damage like this, but it is a whole heaping bunch of just grunt work. Sweaty, itchy, miserable work. It was around this time I think Brian really got comfortable with glasswork. Of course, there was still the big matter of the big hole. This was next on Brian's to-do list. Again, he got the hull manipulated back into the right shape using bottle jacks and lumber. After clearing away the damaged areas, he started building a form to give the correct shape to his repairs. First, he repaired the deck using new foam and again the laminating scheme from PDQ. The big hole also extended down the side of the hull into the giant crack that extended far below the waterline. From what I've seen aboard the boat and also in Brian's videos, it looks like he did a great job on the repairs. Unfortunately, due to the aforementioned UV damage, I'm probably going to have to redo at least some of the areas where the laminate has been exposed to sun. Brian also repaired some cracks along the keels, replaced the aforementioned secondary bulkhead, and got started on some of the interior repairs. Last but not least, he also rebuilt both of the engines that we checked out a couple of weeks ago. I've talked quite a bit to Brian over the last 4 months, and he seems like a generally really nice and great guy. I am really excited to meet him in person. I think there might be a chance he'll be at the boat show in Annapolis. If you want a more in-depth look into Brian's part of this refit, then I highly recommend you go check out his channel, Brian Sailing. But yeah, for now, let's get back to the elephant. There are hundreds of projects on the to-do list for this boat. How the heck do we pick which one to start with? I don't know if this is the smartest way to approach this project, but I've decided that the first big milestone we'll be working towards is to get this boat ready to go back in the water in a state where it can maneuver under its own power. Why start with that milestone? Well, for the simple reason that if we ever need to move this catamaran, it'll have to be on the water. My reasoning is pretty simple, because the thing I'm the most nervous about with this project is not the amount of work that has to happen here or my ability to do that work. I know I can do this work, it is just a matter of time. What I'm the most nervous about with this project is the heat here in Florida. The salvage yard the boat is currently located in is a great place for a refit like this. It is affordable and basically you can do whatever you want to here, nobody cares. But the Florida heat is no joke. And I am just not really built for hot weather. So while we don't currently have any plans of moving the catamaran, I would like it to be an option for us if it turns out I can't handle the Florida heat long term. Every local I've talked to here in Florida keeps sounding kind of like a rerun of Game of Thrones. Winter is coming, winter is coming, claiming that it's 3 months of hell living in Florida followed by 9 months of heaven. I haven't seen the winter yet, but supposedly it's cooler than the summer. I really hope so. For us to have this boat in a state where it can be in the water and maneuver under its own power, well, we have to patch up the hole in this keel. We also have to get the engine reinstalled, which is gonna be right where I'm standing here. But before we do any of that, there's a giant water tank that sits here underneath the head. I don't know if there's anything wrong with it, but I definitely want to inspect it before we do anything else, because I think the easiest way to get this water tank out is to remove the diesel tank and then cut a giant hole in the bulkhead down here and drag it out that way. So we definitely want to do that before installing anything else in the engine compartment. Over here on the port side, as you can see, where I'm stepping over right now, the diesel tank is already removed, but there's a ton of water in this keel, so we'll have to figure that out. And there you can see that the bulkhead I would cut open to drag out the water tank on the starboard side. All the tanks here on the boat are aluminum tanks, but they're built in a really clever way where they're suspended, so they're not sitting in yucky water and slowly corroding to smithereens. So we might get lucky and all the tanks are still okay, but before we do anything, we should definitely inspect them. Once the tanks are okay or have been replaced and the engine compartments have been all nice and painted and are looking beautiful, then we'll have to reassemble the engines. Right now, there's a bunch of stuff that needs to get reinstalled. Like for instance, this is one of the heat exchangers, but we also need new alternators, new water pumps, new alternators, a whole heap of stuff. Of course, engines are important, but equally or even more so, this is, I believe, a part of the rack and pinion steering for the boat, which is made by good old Jefa back in Denmark. In my opinion, rack and pinion steering is the way to go, short of just having a tiller. It is going to be so much more reliable and simple than hydraulics or cables or chains. I am super excited to go through the different components in the steering system for many reasons, but also because it'll probably involve a couple of calls to good old Jefa back in Denmark, and I'm kind of excited to speak a little bit of Danish again. We might be able to reuse some of the old components from the steering, but then again, on the other hand, steering is like the last thing you want issues with, so we'll definitely err on the side of caution. Once we have the engines and the steering figured out, it would also be nice to get some kind of anti-fouling on the hulls. Unfortunately, that is not going to be as simple as it might sound, because we have a bunch of glasswork here that probably needs to be redone. In my opinion, Brian did a great job on these repairs. Unfortunately, life threw him a little bit of a curveball and he never got them covered up with paint. So they've been exposed to UV for far too long. So I'm probably gonna have to redo a lot of this work. And seeing as the repair extends far below the waterline, that is definitely something we should do before anti-fouling anything. That gives you a broad understanding of what I'll be working towards as our first milestone. Now, the steps I mentioned in the beginning of the video, like replacing the ladder with some steps and getting air conditioning in the boat, that's what I'll be working on in the coming weeks. And then in the coming months, we'll work towards the first milestone. There are other things in my steps for the coming weeks that I haven't mentioned yet, like for instance, fixing all the cracks in the deck. To do that, it would be really nice to get a tent over the boat, so that's another thing we'll add to the steps portion. Those of you who are long-time viewers of the channel will recognize a board like this. This is a thing from software development where you use this to track progress, and it's a really good way for me to visualize what I have to do and what I'm doing and what I've done for you guys. Next week we'll deal with the tidy up task. We have some volunteers showing up, so this should be fairly quick. The week after that, I want to build some steps and potentially also install air conditioning if we're ready for that. Then put a tent over the boat. I still haven't figured out the exact solution for that, but I'm working on that. After that, permanently seal up all of the leaks, fix all of the cracks in the deck, and then move on to make a new Kanban board for milestone number 1. Better keep this guy up inside of the boat so we don't lose any post-its. In terms of making some actual real progress this week, I want to see if I can finish the tramp ramp here. The tramp ramp sits up on the foredeck between the two trampolines. My adventure with this thing started a few weeks back. Unfortunately, our tramp ramp was badly damaged during the hurricane. Brian had already started the repair, but there was still a fair chunk of work left to do. I cleaned up the damaged areas and reinforced the entire ramp to make it stronger than new. After a couple of applications of fairing compound, which is, as always, a time-consuming endeavor, and a few days spent hunting smaller and smaller imperfections, I was finally able to apply primer on the top of the ramp, and this is where I ran out of time. A few weeks later, I resumed my efforts and got the bottom of the ramp cleaned up and then applied both primer and top coat. Because I was now outside of the overcoating interval for the primer on the top of the ramp, I had to sand everything before applying a fresh coat of primer. For the inside and outside corners and edges where the sander is a little bit too aggressive, I busted out my newest sander, also known as the wife unit. Unlike my other sanders, this one doesn't run on air or electricity, but rather target runs and kisses. After applying 2 more coats of primer, we were finally ready for top coat. In what can best be described as the continuity blunder of the century, at least for our little channel, you might have noticed that it's a lot more tidy here under the boat now. Just look at the area back here. Pretty dang spiffy. What happened was we'd already scheduled some volunteers to help tidy up, and then I kind of ran out of time for the tramp ramp, so then we had to do the tidying up before that was done, but I didn't want to finish this video without having the tramp ramp be done. Which is, of course, also why the wife unit Ava magically appeared back in town.
It's also funny how everything magically got a lot cleaner now back in town. No, just kidding. I cannot take credit for that, as you guys will soon see.
I think that credit goes to the volunteers.
Yeah.
But the tidy up video will be coming out in the next few weeks. For now, let's get back to the tramp ramp. I have 3 coats of the finishing primer on here now, and I applied that with these mohair rollers. So just as you would expect when rolling on a paint like that, there is a slight texture to the surface. And don't worry about the little patches here, that's just because I've been filling some tiny little pinholes. Really, I should get another coat of primer on top of that at least, but we're again out of time. To hopefully get a flawless finish on this thing when we're done, I'm gonna knock down the tiny bit of texture in the finishing primer with some 320 grit sandpaper. On a quick little side note, in previous videos when I've sanded a primer prior to applying top coat to get a nice flat surface to get the top coat onto. I've gotten a few somewhat condescending comments calling me a maroon for sanding the primer prior to applying top coat, but I don't think it's just me. I think that is a thing that's done, and I think it makes a lot of sense, because how are you going to get a nice flat surface if you don't start out with a nice flat surface? Around 4 or 5 years ago, prior to splashing Athena back in Denmark, I painted Athena's hull with a product from Interlux or International, depending on where in the world you're located. That product was called Perfection Pro. Just as with the Alexseal products I'm about to use, Perfection Pro is meant to be rolled on without the need for any tipping. Athena's hull turned out looking pretty dang spiffy, but for me to be able to pull that off, I did get some very COVID-friendly instructions over FaceTime from a really awesome guy named Jason. Alexseal is a little bit different in the sense that they have a specific little roll additive you need to add if you want to use a roller. Other than the super cute little bottle here, there is of course the paint itself, there's the reducer and the converter. This will be my first time using this paint in anger. I used it on the bottom of the Tramp ramp, but I don't really care how the bottom looks. So yeah, the top is for all the marbles. On a quick little side note, my friend Andy from Boatworks Today, which is where I got this paint from, he always likes to use the mohair rollers. So I figured I would give that a try, but historically I've always been a foam guy. Over here I couldn't get the normal foam rollers I used back in Europe, so Andy recommended these things instead. But there's something weird about these. Normal size hole for a roller, that's the exact same size we have back in Europe. But what the heck is up with this cavernous opening here? That is weird. Having realized this stupid difference here, we stopped by Lowe's this morning, and sure enough, they had a paint roller handle thingy that will fit that hole. But why? If there's somebody smarter than me in the comment section that could please tell me why the heck is this a thing? Why isn't the small hole good enough? This just, I mean, unless anybody has a good argument for it, it seems like kind of a money grab of sorts, but yeah, educate me down in the comment section. And of course the Frankenstein roll here is too wide for my regular tray. God, why is this a thing? I am really excited to hear what kind of reasons there are for this thing, but yeah, let's send the ever so lovely wife unit off to Lowe's to see if they have a tray that will actually fit this monster. Painting this thing is gonna be a fun challenge because the big flat surfaces, they're super easy, right? The difficult thing are all the little corners and radiuses and stuff like that, and this sure has a lot of those. So I haven't really done much painting over the last 3 or 4 years when we've been sailing, but I think my best chance of pulling this off is keeping the shortest possible working edge, meaning working this way. Once I get into this opening here, there's going to be more edges and stuff. That's going to be a little bit annoying, but we'll try and deal with that. And then also I want to make sure that as soon as I'm approaching a corner or an edge or something like that, that the roller is almost dry. I definitely don't want it to cause any kind of sags or runs. With this many corners and curves, it might have been easier to spray this part, but I've chosen to go with the roller for a couple of reasons. For one, it's a small part, and also the compressor we have right now is not quite big enough for spraying, but also it would be really fun to do a comparison between the Perfection Pro I rolled on Athena's hull and the Alexseal product. So yeah, that's my reasoning for putting myself in this situation. Good morning, guys. It is the next morning. The paint has cured, and I gotta say, this turned out really well. There is a tiny bit of dust stuck in the first coat. That's a bit of a shame, but yeah, we can't really avoid that with the dump next door. This has been my first encounter with Alexseal, and I am thoroughly impressed. Of course, I've only used the Alexseal for this one little part here yet, so I'm definitely not an expert, but it seemed like it was easier to apply than the Perfection Pro. It seemed like it was less wanting to sag and run, but yeah, like I said, thoroughly impressed. If we quickly take a look at this and then compare it to what it looked like a few weeks ago when I first started repairing it, I think we can all agree that it's quite a big improvement. According to the TDS, or the technical data sheet, we still need to get an additional 1 or 2 more coats on here with a light sanding in between. But that's not really going to be a big visual difference, so we won't bore you guys with that. Instead, I think we'll simply just proclaim the first part of this giant, massive project done. So yeah, now there's just the rest of it.
It is such a huge relief that the boat is finally ours. It feels so good, and I am so excited about this project. But unfortunately, I am only going to be here for a couple weeks until I have to head back to the salt mines, but I'm just really excited to get started.
Yeah, and it is cool that you got back just in time for us to get it, and
Yeah.
was a part of that at least,
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
tidying up.
Exactly.
Before ending this video, we just want to say a quick big thank you to everybody that has held on. We know it's been a bit of a
Yeah.
prolonged process.
Yeah, it's been a wild couple months, but thank
Yeah.
you so much. It feels good. We're finally through the other end, so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and now we can get started on getting set up here, and then once that's at a reasonable level, then we can finally start digging into the boat work. And on that uplifting note, we'll end this week's video here. We hope to see you all guys back here aboard the catamaran next week for yet more a glorious DIY. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video,
Please remember to leave a like.
see you. Yep,
See you in Florida!
sweaty, sweaty Florida.